It's minus 42 degrees, the wind stopped 3 hours ago, which somehow makes it worse. Because now the cold isn't moving. It's just sitting on everything. On the trees, on the ground, on the walls of your cabin. And somewhere in interior Alaska tonight, 3 men are finding out if the structure they built with their own hands is actually going to hold. One of them is inside a steel arch that's sweating on the inside while it freezes on the outside. One of them is listening to his A-frame logs tick and groan under 4 feet of accumulated snow. And one of them just watched the stone fireplace push heat into the room for the 6 hours straight, without adding a single log. Only one of these men built what you'd call a forever cabin. The other 2 built lessons. And by the end of this, you're going to know exactly which is which, and why the answer is going to surprise you. Most people who dream about building an off-grid cabin in Alaska think the hard part is the cold. It's not. The cold is predictable. You can insulate against cold. You can burn against cold. Cold is a known quantity with known solutions. The hard part is everything cold does to your building over time. The freeze-thaw cycles that split your chinking open in year 3. The condensation that rots your wall cavity from the inside out. The permafrost shift that tilts your foundation after a warm spring. The snow load that doesn't collapse your roof all at once. It just stresses the ridge beam a little more every year until one February morning, something gives. Alaska doesn't kill cabins in dramatic moments. It kills them slowly in the dark, in ways you don't notice until it's too late. So when we talk about a cabin that survives Alaskan winters, we're not talking about surviving one winter. We're talking about surviving 30 of them. We're talking about a structure that outlasts the man who built it. That's the real standard. And most cabins don't meet it. Let's talk about the 3 that might. The A-frame. The first time you see a well-built A-frame in a snowy forest, something happens in your brain. It just looks right. The steep pitch. The way the roof line almost touches the ground. The dark logs soaking up whatever thin winter sunlight manages to break through the canopy. It looks like it belongs there. And that feeling is actually pointing at something real. Because the A-frame design is one of the oldest cold weather structural solutions in the world. The geometry is doing serious work. Here's what most people miss. The steep pitch isn't just about snow sliding off the roof. That's part of it. But the real magic is that the roof is the walls. There's no separate wall system fighting the roof load. The entire structure is one continuous triangle, and a triangle under compression is one of the strongest shapes in nature. Think about that for a second. When 4 feet of snow accumulates on that A-frame, and the load travels straight down the slope and into the ground. The structure isn't fighting the weight. It's channeling it. Compare that to a conventional cabin with vertical walls and a pitched roof. The walls are carrying lateral thrust. You need proper engineering to handle that force. You need rafter ties, collar beams, ridge beams rated for span. Get any of it wrong, and the roof slowly pushes the walls outward over years of snow load. The A-frame doesn't have that problem. But here's where it gets complicated. The A-frame's greatest structural strength is also its greatest livability weakness, because that angled ceiling eats your usable space. You've got full headroom in maybe the center third of your footprint. Everything else slopes down to nothing. You can't stand at the walls. You can't put furniture there. You can't use those corners for anything except storage, which means a 400 square foot A-frame gives you maybe 220 square feet of actually usable living space. In Alaska, that's not a small problem. You're going to be inside that cabin for 6 months. The walls are going to close in. The psychological pressure of a small, confined space during a dark Alaskan winter is something most cabin content never talks about, but experienced builders take it deadly seriously. The other issue is the logs themselves. Dark log construction in a wet, cold climate is a love story with a complicated ending. In the first few years, it's beautiful. The logs settle and tighten. The structure feels monolithic. It's genuinely impressive what you can build with hand-cut timber and a good eye for fit. Then the moisture cycles start working on you. Every spring, that dark wood absorbs meltwater. Every fall, it tries to release it before the freeze locks everything solid. The wood is expanding and contracting, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but constantly. Over years, That movement opens gaps in the chinking. Small gaps at first, then larger ones. And a gap in your chinking at -40 isn't just an insulation problem. It's a condensation problem. Warm interior air finds a gap, hits the cold exterior surface, and deposits moisture inside your wall system. That moisture, trapped, is the beginning of rot. The builders who do A-frames well know this. They use traditional natural chinking materials that can flex with the wood movement instead of fighting it. They design the overhangs generously to shed water away from the base logs. They choose their site carefully to avoid north-facing walls that never fully dry. Done right, an A-frame in Alaska can last generations. Done wrong, you're rechinking every 5 years and fighting a slow-motion rot problem in your base logs before the structure is 20 years old. The thermal performance of a well-chinked, well-built log A-frame is actually excellent, better than most people expect. Logs have a property called thermal mass. They absorb heat slowly during the day and release it slowly at night. The temperature inside a log cabin doesn't swing wildly with the fire. It holds. A good log A-frame in interior Alaska, properly built, runs on roughly 4 to 5 cords of firewood per winter. That's about 8 to 10 full pickup truck loads. For a solo occupant who cuts his own wood, that's manageable. For a family, it's a full-time secondary job in summer. The verdict on the A-frame. It's a brilliant structure for cold climates, but demands a builder who understands wood movement, moisture management, and is willing to do maintenance. It rewards skill. It punishes shortcuts. The Quonset. Pull up any off-grid forum from the last 15 years, and you'll find somebody making the case for Quonset huts in cold climates. The argument is reasonable on the surface. Pre-engineered corrugated steel arch. No load-bearing walls to fail. Excellent snow load capacity because of the same geometric logic as the A-frame. The arch distributes weight beautifully. Fast to assemble compared to hand-building a log structure. Relatively cheap per square foot. Historically proven. The U.S. military built over 150,000 of these things during World War II specifically because they were fast, tough, and cheap to build anywhere in the world. So why does the Quonset fail in Alaska? It doesn't fail structurally. That arch isn't going anywhere. It fails thermally. And when you understand why it fails thermally, you understand one of the most fundamental principles of cold climate building. Steel conducts heat approximately 400 times faster than wood. Let that land for a moment. The wall of a log cabin is slowing down heat transfer. Dramatically, the wall of a Quonset hut is basically a radiator for your interior warmth, pumping it directly into the outside air as fast as physics will allow. At -40, with a steel skin between you and the outside, you are in a thermally hostile environment. You can insulate the inside of that steel, and you must, but here's where the second problem emerges. When warm interior air meets a cold steel surface, it deposits moisture. Every drop of water vapor in your cabin air is looking for the coldest surface it can find. In a properly insulated wood structure, that cold surface is far away on the exterior, and your vapor barrier is managing the problem. In a Quonset, if your interior insulation has any gap, any cold bridge, any imperfection, that steel is right there and it's going to sweat. The builders who make Quonsets work in Alaska know this. They spray foam the entire interior, a thick, continuous layer with no gaps, no thermal bridges. Then they build an interior wall system inside the foam. Effectively, they're building a cabin inside the Quonset. It works. But now you've spent significant money on spray foam on top of the structure cost, and you've given up 6 to 8 inches of interior space on every curved surface. The heating cost on an unmodified or poorly insulated Quonset in interior Alaska is brutal. Some estimates put it at 2 to 3 times the fuel consumption of a comparable log structure. You are literally heating the Alaskan outdoors through your walls. Even with excellent insulation, the heating efficiency never quite catches a well-built log structure. The thermal mass is simply not there. A log wall holds heat. Steel with foam does not. When your fire dies at 3 a.m., the interior temperature of a Quonset drops faster than you want to think about at -40. The condensation problem doesn't go away even with good insulation. It just moves. Now, the condensation forms between your insulation and your steel skin. in a space you cannot see, cannot dry, and cannot monitor. Corrosion begins. Slowly. In the dark. There's one scenario where the Quonset genuinely wins, and it deserves to be said clearly. If you need shelter fast with minimal building skill in a location where logs are unavailable or expensive to harvest, the Quonset gets you under cover quickly. As a transitional structure while you build something better, it's genuinely useful. As a workshop, a storage building, a garage, excellent. As a primary dwelling at -40 for 30 years, the physics are against you. The heavy timber log home. This is the one that looks expensive in the thumbnail. Big hand-hewn logs, heavy timber frame, stone chimney, real overhangs, a structure that announces itself as permanent before you read a single word of the caption. And that announcement is telling the truth. This is a forever build. And the reason comes down to a combination of three things that no other cabin type gets simultaneously right: structural mass, thermal mass, and moisture management. Let's start with the logs themselves. We're not talking about the slender logs of the A-frame. We're talking about logs with serious diameter, often 14 to 20 inches across, walls that are 16 to 18 inches thick in their thinnest cross-section. That thickness is doing multiple jobs at once. Structurally, it's nearly indestructible under normal Alaskan conditions: snow load, wind, the gradual shifting of permafrost. A heavy timber log structure distributes and absorbs all of it through sheer mass. Thermally, it becomes something remarkable. And R value isn't the whole story with logs, and this is something most people misunderstand. Standard insulation is rated on its ability to slow heat transfer in steady-state conditions. Log walls don't just slow heat transfer. They store heat and release it over time. The thermal lag in a 16-inch log wall can be 12 hours or more. The heat you put into that structure at 6 p.m. is still coming out of those walls at 6 a.m. That's why the man in a heavy log home can let his fire burn down and still wake up to a warm cabin. And it's why heating this structure, properly built, is more efficient than it looks on paper. You're not fighting the cold all night. You're loading those walls with thermal energy and letting them do the work while you sleep. Firewood consumption in a well-built heavy timber log home, properly sited, proper overhangs, good windows, runs around 3 to 4 cords per winter in interior Alaska. Less than the A-frame in some cases because the thermal mass is working harder. Now the stone chimney. This is not decoration. This is engineering. A masonry chimney has more thermal mass than any other single component of the cabin. A properly built stone or brick chimney, with a quality firebox and a well-designed flue, absorbs an enormous amount of combustion heat that would otherwise go straight up and out of the building. Then it releases that heat into the living space for hours after the fire is out. Traditional Finnish and Russian builders understood this centuries ago. In Scandinavian and northern Russian building traditions, the masonry mass heater is the center of the home, not just physically but thermally. You fire hard twice a day, and it heats the house around the clock. The stone chimney in a heavy timber Alaskan log home is operating on the same principle. It's not just venting smoke. It's functioning as a heat battery. The cold draft problem that plagues metal stoves and simple prefabricated chimney systems, where cold outside air pours down a cold flue when the fire isn't burning, is dramatically reduced with a masonry chimney because the stone itself holds heat and keeps the draft warm long after combustion has ended. But none of this matters if the moisture management fails. Here's where heavy timber log construction earns its reputation, and where the difference between a good builder and a great one becomes permanent. Logs move, even massive logs. They dry, they settle, they compress under their own weight over the first 3 to 5 years. A heavy timber log home is a living structure in the most literal sense. It's in motion for years after you build it. The great builders design for this motion. They use settling spaces above door frames and window frames that allow the logs above to compress, without transferring load to the rough openings. They use slip joints at interior partition walls. They use hardware that lets the structure move without cracking anything critical. The great builders also obsess over their base logs and their foundation, because the base log, the bottom log sitting closest to the ground, is the most vulnerable point in the entire structure. It gets the most moisture exposure from snowmelt and ground vapor. It's a log that fails first when moisture management is poor. A builder who understands this elevates his base logs on a stone or concrete sill that keeps them off the ground. He designs his roof overhangs to throw water well away from the base of the walls. He chinks with materials that move with the logs rather than fighting them. He places the cabin on a site with natural drainage away from the structure. Done correctly, those base logs are in better condition in year 30 than in year 3. The structure is actually tightening as it settles and the wood fibers compress. Done incorrectly, rot begins at the base, works upward invisibly inside the wall system, and 15 years later you're lifting the entire structure to replace logs that look fine from the outside. The construction timeline for a heavy timber log home is the longest of the 3, and that deserves honesty. An experienced builder working alone can put up an A-frame in a summer. A Quonset shell goes up in days. A proper heavy timber log home takes 2 to 3 serious construction seasons minimum. It takes tools, skill, and physical strength that most people drastically underestimate. The trees have to be selected, felled, limbed, and peeled. The logs have to be dried or worked green with settling allowances built in. Every joint has to be scribed and fitted. The foundation has to be right because everything sits on it for a century. This is not a weekend project. It's not even a year project. It's a commitment. But here's the thing that never makes it into the romanticized cabin content. The man who lives in that heavy timber log home has something the other 2 men don't have. He has a structure that will almost certainly outlive him. In Alaska, that matters in a way it doesn't matter in the lower 48. In remote interior Alaska, your cabin isn't just your home. It's your backup. It's the place a stranger could stumble to in a blizzard and find shelter. It's the structure that holds emergency supplies that might save a life in a bad year. It's the fixed point that defines whether that piece of land is habitable by human beings. A forever cabin is an ego project. It's a gift to whoever comes after you. So here's the honest comparison. 3 builds, 1 winter, 1 question. Which one survives? The A-frame survives beautifully if the builder is skilled, the wood is well sourced, the chinking is properly done, and the maintenance gets done every few years. It's the best option for a solo builder with strong woodworking skills and a modest budget. It will last a long time in the hands of someone who knows what to watch for. The Quonset survives if, and only if, the builder goes all in on interior insulation and accepts that he's really building a cabin inside a steel shell. It's the right choice if you need shelter quickly or if you're in a location without access to good timber. It's the wrong choice if you think the steel arch alone is doing the work. The heavy timber log home survives everything. It survives bad winters, bad decades, bad luck, and neglect. It asks for more upfront, more time, more skill, more physical investment, and it gives back more than any other structure. Not just warmth, not just shelter. Permanence. 3 men, 3 bets against the Alaskan winter. The A-frame builder bet on geometry. The Quonset builder bet on speed. The heavy timber builder bet on time. Only one of those bets pays out over 30 years of -40 winters. And if you're standing in interior Alaska right now, watching the temperature drop, listening to the wind pick up out of the north, watching the snow start come down heavy and sideways, you already know which cabin you want to be inside. The one built to outlast everything.